The snowfall was soft that December evening, the kind that blankets rooftops and silences traffic. Inside the narrow two-story home on the edge of Camden Creek, the Spencer family had gathered around a modest oak table. Twinkling lights framed the windows, casting colorful glows on mismatched plates and worn-out chairs. At the head of the table sat Eleanor Spencer, matriarch and ruler of the household, eyes sharp even behind her thick glasses. Her husband, Harold, lounged beside her with a half-finished scotch. Across from them sat their three sons, Leonard, Thomas, and Daniel. Daniel, the youngest at 30, was gripping a small white envelope in his calloused hands, his palms sweaty despite the cold draft seeping through the walls. The envelope represented 8 months of scrimping, extra shifts at the loading docks, late-night mechanic work, and skipped meals. It contained a gift certificate for a luxury resort stay on the Emerald Isles, a surprise Christmas vacation for his entire family. As the others passed around dishes of glazed ham and mashed potatoes, Daniel cleared his throat. "I've got something for everyone," he said, sliding the envelope toward his mother. Eleanor opened it with the disinterest one might show to junk mail. Her expression didn't change as she read it. Then, with a single flick of her wrist, she dropped it into the trash bin beside her chair. "What is this nonsense?" she said coolly. "You think this makes up for anything? You're still nothing, Daniel. Even your gifts are garbage." The room went silent. Harold pretended to sip his drink, suddenly captivated by the tablecloth's pattern. Leonard and Thomas exchanged a glance but said nothing. Daniel's breath caught in his throat, his lips parted slightly as if to speak, but he didn't. Instead, he sat still, feeling the familiar churn of shame and disbelief roll through his stomach. He had imagined this moment differently, maybe even a rare hug from his mother, or a begrudging thank you. But reality had a way of spitting on his fantasies. Dinner resumed as if nothing had happened. Conversations picked up again. Laughter resumed. But Daniel was no longer part of it. He remained silent, chewing through food that tasted like ash, nodding when spoken to, and smiling without emotion. Later that night, alone in his modest studio apartment above the auto shop, Daniel stared at the ceiling as the heater clanked. His fingers danced over his phone. He opened his banking app and scrolled to the auto loan section. A familiar car loan appeared, the one he had been quietly paying off for nearly 2 years. His parents had no idea it was in his name. They'd assumed it was taken care of, just another invisible hand keeping their world afloat. He canceled it with a few taps. 7 days later, the family's sedan was towed from the driveway while Harold screamed at a confused repo agent. Eleanor stood in her robe on the porch, red-faced and shouting for answers. Daniel got the first of many texts that night. "The car is missing. Call the bank and fix this now," his mother wrote. He smiled, sipped a cup of tea, and put his phone face down on the table. Messages flooded in. "You know your father needs that car," came next. Then, from Leonard, "Dude, just fix it. Don't be dramatic." Thomas added, "Seriously? Mom is a wreck." That was way too far. Eleanor, ever the queen of guilt, sent a final message, "You're selfish and cruel. After everything we've done for you." Daniel chuckled. After everything? The phrase echoed bitterly in his head. His entire life had been one long sacrifice, and yet somehow, he was always the ungrateful one. The afterthought. The mule. He remembered being 14, receiving his first paycheck from the gas station where he worked weekends. He'd planned to buy himself a used skateboard and maybe some decent headphones. But when he came home, Eleanor was waiting. "You live here, don't you?" she'd said. "You eat the food we buy. Time to contribute." She took the check. She took the next one, too. By the time he turned 18, giving her his earnings wasn't just expected, it was required. Leonard and Thomas, meanwhile, played sports, traveled abroad for language immersion camps, and had their college tuition covered in full. They came home with shiny new cars and stories of professors who called them brilliant. Daniel? He was told college was a waste on him. "You're just not academic material," Harold had said, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "We've got to put our resources where they'll be best used." So Daniel had worked. When the dishwasher broke, he replaced it. When Harold's truck sputtered, Daniel fixed it for free. When Leonard needed help covering rent before a big job promotion, Daniel handed him the cash, no questions asked. He never complained. Until now. That night, the calls continued. One after another. By the time the 12th voicemail played, Daniel had made his decision. They could call him selfish all they wanted. This wasn't revenge. It was the start of a new rulebook. He was done living by theirs. Daniel grew up in a house with walls full of portraits, Leonard's graduation photo, Thomas holding a basketball trophy, family vacations from years past. He was in only one picture, a blurry shot in the corner of a family barbecue, where half his face was turned away from the camera. It had always been that way. From the time he could walk, Daniel was taught his role, not as a child to be nurtured, but as the glue to hold everyone else's world together. When he was 15, Daniel got his first real taste of responsibility, not because he wanted it, but because it was demanded. He remembered the scene like it had happened yesterday, the cracked vinyl kitchen chair beneath him, the pile of bills fanned out like playing cards on the table, his mother's steely eyes locked on his. "You're old enough to help now," Eleanor had said, pushing a yellow pad across the table. On it was a handwritten list: groceries, utilities, gas money. At the bottom, circled in red ink, was $200 per month, Daniel. "But I only make $250. He protested, confused. "You live here," Harold grunted from across the room. "You think that's free?" So he paid. Every month. Quietly. Dutifully. He stopped asking for anything: new shoes, school trips, birthday parties. Those belonged to Leonard and Thomas. Summers came and went, and while his brothers attended music festivals or flew to coastal retreats with friends, Daniel stocked shelves, fixed engines, and fell asleep with grease still on his hands. He stopped noticing the ache in his back or the calluses on his palms. They were part of him now, like the silence he wore around his family. When his high school graduation came, he didn't expect much. But what he got was less than nothing. A dry congrats from Harold. A store-brand cake with his name misspelled. No celebration, no pictures. When he asked Eleanor why, she scoffed. "You're not going to college. What's there to celebrate?" He bit back the words that almost escaped. He wanted to scream, "Because I still graduated. Because I made it through, despite everything." But he knew better. His voice had always been too soft to matter. Meanwhile, when Leonard graduated from engineering school, they threw a backyard party with catered food and a DJ. When Thomas landed his first job out of college, they gifted him a Rolex. Daniel watched from the shadows, clapping when expected, smiling as if his insides weren't churning. The years blurred after that. He worked longer hours, took on more side jobs, saved quietly, gave frequently. If the plumbing backed up, he fixed it. If the fridge died, he bought a new one. Every emergency had a single number on speed dial, his. And then came the Christmas incident. After Eleanor threw his gift in the trash, after the car was repossessed, after the text messages and accusations poured in like rain on a leaking roof, Daniel sat alone in his workshop with only the hum of the radiator and the ticking of a broken wall clock for company. He wasn't angry anymore. He was tired. So tired. He revisited memories he'd buried deep, the time Eleanor mocked him for only being a mechanic, the time Harold said, "You'll never be more than a handyman," while bragging about Leonard's promotion at a tech firm. The time Thomas asked him to help move apartments and didn't even offer pizza or gas money. The time he lent his parents $800 for just a temporary medical emergency and never saw it again, or even heard a thank you. And yet, when they needed help, it was always Daniel they turned to. Not the wealthy sons with six-figure incomes. Not the sons with spacious condos and expensive watches. Just Daniel, the one with tired hands and an overdrawn bank account. Until now. 3 days after the car was taken, he got a new alert on his phone, a $2,500 charge to his credit card. It was Eleanor. She had used his card to pay off a hospital bill, again, without asking. The audacity was almost laughable. He disputed the charge immediately. It wasn't hard. He'd never given her authorization. Within hours, the funds were returned. But it wasn't about the money anymore, it was about the assumption. The expectation. The way they saw him not as a person, but as a lifeline. So he started cutting them off. First, the automatic payments, utilities, phone bills, insurance. Then, he revoked access to all shared accounts. Finally, he unlinked their phones from his plan. He wasn't done yet. Tucked away in his old laptop was a legal document, one he'd signed in his early 20s, when Harold had come to him desperate and drowning in debt. They'd refinanced the house under Daniel's name, claiming it was the only way to avoid foreclosure. They'd promised to handle the payments. They didn't. For the last 6 years, Daniel had been paying off the mortgage quietly, never receiving a dime from anyone. Now, he saw the truth clearly: the house wasn't their safety net. It was leverage. So he opened a real estate website, uploaded the documents, called a realtor, and listed the house. He knew what was coming next: calls, threats, tears. But he didn't care. Not anymore. Every sacrifice he'd made had been met with disdain. Every kindness returned with cruelty. He wasn't their son. He was their employee. That night, as he locked up the garage, he stood for a moment under the sky. The stars blinked down at him, cold and distant, yet oddly comforting. He took a deep breath, tasted the winter air, and exhaled. For the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't waiting for someone else to decide his worth. He had made his choice. He was done being buried beneath their expectations. The silence after the storm was almost more unsettling than the shouting would have been. After Daniel listed the house, he expected immediate backlash, a flood of messages, calls, or maybe even someone showing up at the garage in person. Instead, there was nothing. Just eerie quiet. No "how could you?" No "we need to talk." No fake apologies. No begging. At first, he thought maybe they'd finally accepted it. Maybe they'd realized they had pushed too far. But Daniel knew his family. Their silence wasn't surrender, it was plotting. He could practically feel it, thick in the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. He kept working, head down, focusing on the tasks in front of him. The car still needed repairing. Engines still needed tuning. Oil still needed changing. But even with his hands busy, his mind wandered. What would their next move be? It came 3 days later. He got a call, not from Eleanor, not from Harold, but from Thomas. He let it ring out. The voicemail came quickly. "Daniel, you need to call me back. This is serious." "The house. You're really doing this?" A part of Daniel wanted to laugh. Yes, he was really doing it. Yes, they were really losing the home they'd stolen from his future. Yes, this was serious. But not for the reasons they thought. He ignored the call. Later that night, Leonard tried. Then Harold. By the 5th call, curiosity got the better of him. He answered. "Daniel," his father said, voice rigid but controlled. "We need to talk." He stayed silent, waiting. "You listed the house," Harold said, as if Daniel didn't know. "I did." A sharp inhale crackled through the speaker. "Why would you do that? Are you really that angry over a Christmas gift?" Daniel barked a short, humorless laugh. "You stole from me," he said flatly. "It was for your mother's medical bills," Harold snapped. "She's sick, Daniel." "If she's sick," Daniel countered, "why aren't Leonard or Thomas paying for anything?" Silence. "They have their own expenses," Harold said finally, a bit weaker. "And I don't?" Daniel asked, his voice rising just slightly. "Or is it that my life was never meant to matter? I was never supposed to grow up, have a future, build anything. I was just supposed to exist for your convenience." There was another pause. Then, more softly, "If you do this, if you sell the house, we won't have anywhere to go." Daniel waited for the familiar pang of guilt. It didn't come. He knew the truth now. Leonard owned a house with 4 bedrooms and a guest suite. Thomas had a luxury apartment with a 2nd bedroom that doubled as a home gym. Both were more than capable of helping. But they wouldn't. Because they never had. They were the kind of people who only opened their wallets when someone else was watching. "I guess that's your problem," Daniel said, and hung up. The next day, the real storm began. Eleanor called. This time, she wasn't crying. She wasn't even pretending. She was furious. "You ungrateful little brat," she shrieked. "How could you do this to us? After everything we've done for you?" Daniel put her on speaker and kept working on the carburetor in front of him. The bolts were rusted, probably the same age as the car. He didn't respond. "You stole from me," he said eventually, not looking at the phone. "You owe us." Eleanor barked back. "We raised you, didn't we? Fed you. Kept a roof over your head. Did you ever make Leonard or Thomas pay rent?" he asked. Silence. "Did they ever have to cover the utility bills?" More silence. "You were always the responsible one," she said eventually, her tone softening as if trying a different tactic. "We knew we could count on you." "Yeah," Daniel muttered. "You could." He hung up. He was done explaining himself to people who didn't care to understand. 2 weeks later, the house sold. The real estate market had been hot, and he got an offer above asking price. He didn't warn them. He didn't send a notice. He let the system do its job. The eviction notice landed in their mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon. Wednesday morning, Leonard stormed into Daniel's workplace, red-faced and irate. "You're really letting them get kicked out?" he hissed, standing in the bay while Daniel wiped grease from his hands. Daniel didn't look up. "You've got space. Let them move in with you." Leonard scoffed. "That's not the point." "It's exactly the point," Daniel said, finally turning to him. "You make six figures. So does Thomas. But neither of you lifted a finger while I was drowning." Leonard didn't have a reply. He just stood there, cheeks flushed, before finally leaving in a huff. Back home, or what had once been their home, Eleanor and Harold packed begrudgingly. They ended up moving into a cramped rental on the outskirts of town. Daniel heard through mutual acquaintances that Eleanor hated the neighbors, Harold couldn't stand the noise, and both complained constantly about how Daniel had ruined the family. But Daniel? He was free. He didn't check his phone compulsively anymore. No one was draining his bank account. He bought a used motorcycle he'd been eyeing for years. Took a weekend trip to the mountains. He didn't need permission. He didn't need approval. He was finally living a life that belonged to him. And the fire they had lit, the one meant to keep them warm while he burned, was out. For good. The invitation came in a text message from Leonard, of all people. "Dinner Sunday. Fancy place. For Mom. You coming?" Daniel stared at it, thumb hovering over the reply button. It had been almost 6 months since he sold the house. Half a year since he walked away from being their financial safety net, the forgotten sibling, the disposable provider. In that time, he'd changed more than he thought possible. New apartment. New job. New peace. But the text, it wasn't just a dinner. It was a trap. He knew that. And yet, something in him said go. Not to reconnect. Not to make peace. But to end it properly. He responded a few hours later. "Sure. I'll be there." The restaurant was called the Laurel. White tablecloths. Dim lighting. The kind of place where waiters wear suits and no one blinks at a $100 entree. Daniel arrived 10 minutes late, on purpose. Eleanor was seated at the center of the table, wrapped in pearls and old pride. Harold sat stiffly beside her, glass of wine untouched. Leonard and Thomas were on either side, dressed like they'd come from a board meeting. Daniel, in contrast, wore jeans and a clean black button-up. He looked like who he was, a man who worked with his hands, and wasn't ashamed of it. "Daniel," Eleanor said, feigning joy as she placed a hand over her heart. "I knew you'd come." He smiled politely and sat down. "Happy Mother's Day." They all ordered. The small talk began. Stocks. Work. The price of organic food. No one asked how Daniel was doing. No one commented on his new haircut or if he liked the city he'd moved to. It was as if the last 6 months had vanished. When the bill came, the real show started. The waiter placed the check on the table with a subtle nod. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She slid it toward Daniel like it was a piece of family history. "You've been doing so well lately," she said sweetly. "Why don't you cover this one?" There it was. The final test. He could feel it, the anticipation in their eyes. Leonard was already reaching for his phone like he knew he wouldn't need it. Thomas leaned back in his chair, smug and relaxed. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his card. Then he laughed. Loudly. Genuinely. The kind of laugh that draws stares from other tables. Eleanor's smile faltered. "What's funny?" He set the card on the table and shook his head. "Oh, nothing. You really thought." He trailed off, still smiling. "You thought I was back, didn't you? That selling the house, cutting the payments, saying no. You thought all that was just a phase. That eventually I'd come crawling back, like the good little wallet I used to be." Harold cleared his throat. "Daniel, let's not make a scene." "I'm not," Daniel said, standing slowly. "I'm just not paying." Eleanor's eyes flared. "It's Mother's Day. I already gave you a gift," he said, slipping his jacket over his shoulder. "What gift?" She spat. "Your independence." He walked out before anyone could respond. Back at his apartment, Daniel made tea and sat on the balcony, the city skyline glowing in the distance. Below, cars wove through the streets like silent currents. He felt no regret. No sting. No sadness. Just silence. And freedom. They tried to reach him, of course. Texts, calls, emails. Some were angry. Some were pleading. Most just tried to guilt him in the same tired ways. He didn't answer. One day, he got a message from Thomas. They might lose their rental. They're behind. You happy now? Daniel stared at it for a moment, then opened his banking app. There it was, an email from months ago confirming that the mortgage on the rental wasn't in his name. This time, he had no part in it. It was all on Leonard and Thomas. And, predictably, they had failed to keep up. He forwarded the email back to Thomas. No message. Just the facts. Then he blocked the number. Daniel wasn't cruel. He was just done. He spent the following weeks doing something he hadn't done in years, living. He rode his motorcycle up the coast. He visited an old friend in the countryside. He joined a local mechanics guild and helped teach young apprentices. He even started a savings account, not for emergencies or family disasters, but for something indulgent, maybe a cabin in the woods or a trip to Iceland. Every dollar in that account was his. No one else's. One evening, almost a year to the day since he sold the house, his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. Against his better judgment, he answered. Daniel, a voice said. It was Leonard. I just wanted to let you know. Mom's been asking about you. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Mom or her bank account? A long pause. Then, come on, man. It's been a year. Family's family. Daniel leaned against his kitchen counter, watching the sun dip below the skyline. No, he said gently. Not mine. He hung up. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about reclaiming something stolen long ago, his voice, his worth, his life. The Last Supper had been served. And he wasn't hungry anymore. A year had passed since Daniel walked out of that restaurant. One full revolution around the sun since he handed his family their final invoice, the cost of years spent as their human ATM, the emotional laborer who patched up their lives while his own slowly eroded. And for once, time didn't feel like a weight. It felt like wings. He lived in a mid-sized apartment in a city where no one knew his name. No family obligations here. No guilt-soaked dinners. No surprise charges on his bank statements. He woke when he wanted. Rode his motorcycle when the air was crisp. Cooked his own meals. Laughed at his own jokes. It wasn't luxurious, but it was quiet. And it was his. One spring morning, while drinking coffee on his small balcony, his phone buzzed. A new email. Subject line, delinquency notice, Spencer residence, rental property. Daniel blinked. He didn't recognize the sender at first, then he remembered. The rental company that had taken over the property where his parents lived after the house sale. He opened the message. Late payments. 2 consecutive months. Final warning issued. So, they hadn't learned. Thomas and Leonard had promised they'd take care of it. Of course, they had. Rich people were always generous with promises, just not with follow-through. Daniel imagined the scene, Eleanor complaining about the peeling paint, Harold fuming about neighbors who didn't mow their lawns. Meanwhile, Thomas was likely in Spain, and Leonard investing in crypto or overpriced suits. Daniel forwarded the email back to both of them. No message. No explanation. He closed his laptop, stretched his arms, and smiled to himself. Let them scramble. Let them finally taste the stress they'd let him chew on for a decade. He wasn't part of that chaos anymore. There had been moments of doubt. Right after the sale. Right after the move. Quiet nights when old voices echoed in his mind, you're cruel. You're heartless. We're your family. But family didn't steal from him. Family didn't discard his efforts like trash. Family didn't assign worth based on what he could give and then call it love. Daniel had stopped chasing their approval. And when he did, he found something more powerful than acceptance, self-respect. He started therapy. Slowly, cautiously. At first, it felt indulgent, like something only people with time and trust funds did. But over the months, he realized how much he'd been carrying. He spoke about being 15 and watching his mother hand his paycheck to a debt collector without warning. He spoke about the shame of wearing shoes held together by duct tape while Leonard got Air Jordans. He spoke about every instance of being told you're just not like them, as if that explained why he deserved less. The therapist asked him once, "Why did you stay so long?" Daniel's voice cracked when he answered. "Because I thought that's what love looked like." But it wasn't. Love isn't silent expectation. Love isn't manipulation dressed as duty. Love isn't conditional on how much you can pay. Love is reciprocal. And he had never known that from them. He built new traditions. Friday night poker games with guys from the shop. Saturday morning rides through the hills. Cooking classes with neighbors. He even adopted a dog, Rusty, A rescue with one ear flopped and a bark far bigger than his size. Rusty didn't care about Daniel's bank account. He just liked being walked, fed, and loved. Simple. Honest. One afternoon, Rusty sat beside Daniel on the balcony while they watched the sun dip behind the city's glass towers. His phone buzzed again. A birthday reminder, Eleanor Spencer. Daniel stared at it for a while. He didn't delete the notification. He didn't call her, either. Instead, he walked inside, grabbed a beer, and toasted to the woman who taught him the most important lesson of his life. That you don't owe love to those who treat you like a resource. Reddit had exploded when he shared his story. Thousands of upvotes. Hundreds of comments. Some praised him. Others called him cold. You're heartless, they'd written. They're still your family. But Daniel didn't flinch. He wrote a reply that still lived pinned at the top of the thread. They were my family every time they drained my account without asking. Every time I was told to celebrate my brothers while being told I wasn't worth the same. I gave them every part of me, my time, my money, my energy. When I finally asked for respect, they laughed. When I set boundaries, they screamed. I don't regret walking away. I regret not doing it sooner. Another comment had asked, would you do it all again? Daniel replied with 3 simple words. In a heartbeat. His final message to the world, and to anyone still on the fence about whether it's okay to walk away from a toxic family, was this. You are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not cruel for cutting off chaos. You are not wrong for saying no more. Because family should not be a life sentence. It should be a sanctuary. And if it isn't? Then build one yourself. Daniel did. And for the first time in his life, he was finally home.